In the remote village where my family lived during the late Qing dynasty, there existed a tradition both eerie and haunting: Minghun, or ghost weddings. It was believed that if a family's ancestral tombs included a solitary, unmarried grave, it could cast a shadow of misfortune over the descendants. This practice was rooted in the belief that an unsettled spirit, without the companionship of a spouse, would cause unrest and bring bad luck to the living relatives. To ensure prosperity and peace for future generations, families would arrange marriages between the living and the deceased. These ghost weddings were more than just rituals. They were a reflection of the rural Chinese culture at the time, deeply influenced by a blend of Confucianism, Taoism, and folk beliefs. The fear of ghosts and the desire to maintain familial harmony were powerful motivators, pushing families to take desperate measures. My great-aunt May's tragic involvement in such a ceremony became a somber tale passed down through generations, serving as a chilling reminder of these ancient customs. May, at 17, was known in the village for her quiet beauty and kind nature. Her family, however, was ensnared in the relentless grip of poverty. Her father, a stoic farmer, toiled endlessly in the fields, while her mother, though frail, managed their modest household with unwavering determination. Despite their best efforts, they could barely make ends meet. The Liang family, on the other hand, was wealthy and influential. Their son, Liang, had been frail from birth and had succumbed to illness just after his 25th birthday. A respected monk had prophesied that Liang's restless spirit could find peace and potentially be reborn if he were married to a living bride. Desperate to secure their son's spiritual well-being, the Liangs offered a substantial dowry to any family willing to marry their daughter to the deceased Liang. May's parents, facing insurmountable debt and seeing no other way out, reluctantly agreed to the arrangement. They were deeply conflicted, torn between their love for May and their dire financial situation. Their decision, driven by necessity, would irrevocably alter May's life. The night of the wedding was shrouded in a darkness that seemed to swallow the very stars. In the dead of night, May was led to the Liang family's ancestral hall, a place rarely visited even in daylight. The hall was an imposing structure, filled with the shadows of countless ancestors watching from their framed portraits, their eyes seemingly following May as she entered. Only close family members and the old shaman were present, their faces partially hidden in the dim light. The shaman, a stooped figure with age-worn robes, began to chant in a language that felt ancient, almost primordial. His voice was a low rhythmic murmur, rising and falling like the breath of the earth itself. The air grew thick with the pungent aroma of incense, swirling around May in ghostly tendrils. May, draped in a traditional red wedding gown, stood trembling. Her face was obscured by a delicate veil, but beneath it, her eyes darted nervously around the room. The fabric of the gown was heavy, each embroidered symbol feeling like a chain linking her to the spirits of the past. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, shadows that danced and twisted like restless souls. As the shaman's incantations filled the room, May risked a glance at her parents. Her father's face was a mask of sorrow, his eyes downcast. Her mother, pale and trembling, clutched her shawl as if it were a lifeline. Their decision, driven by desperation and the lure of the dowry, weighed heavily on them. May could see the guilt in their eyes, the unspoken apology they could never voice. The rituals continued, each step more unsettling than the last. The shaman drew symbols in the air with a branch of sacred wood. Each motion deliberate and filled with a power May could almost feel. The symbols hung in the air for a moment before dissolving, as if being absorbed by the very walls. The chanting grew louder, the rhythm quicker, and May felt the cold fingers of dread tightening around her heart. The rituals of the ghost wedding had been elaborate, each step carefully designed to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. During the ceremony, the shaman had prepared offerings of rice, incense, and paper effigies, all meant to appease the spirits. These were burned in a brazier, their smoke curling upwards as if carrying the prayers to the heavens. The shaman had drawn symbols on the ground with sacred chalk, each one imbued with ancient power. May had been instructed to step within these symbols, each step a binding act, a further entrenchment into the ritual. At one point, the shaman had taken a lock of May's hair, tying it with a red string to a similar lock of Liang's hair, taken from his preserved remains. This, the shaman had explained, would ensure their spirits were entwined. Throughout the ceremony, May's mind was a storm of emotions. She felt like a leaf caught in a gale, powerless and adrift. Fear was the strongest, a gnawing, insidious force that threatened to consume her. Her thoughts raced, darting from one terrifying possibility to another. She had heard the whispers about ghost marriages her entire life, stories of spirits bound to the living, of brides haunted until their dying days. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The cold, unfeeling rituals, the sense of being an offering rather than a bride. Her dreams of a simple, happy life seemed so distant now, like something from another world. She had once imagined marrying a kind, living man, building a home filled with laughter and warmth. Those dreams were now shattered, replaced by the bleak, chilling reality of her union with a ghost. Each chant from the shaman, each flicker of the candlelight, deepened her sense of foreboding. The shadows on the walls seemed to move with a life of their own, twisting into grotesque shapes that mocked her plight. She felt a cold sweat on her skin, a physical manifestation of her inner turmoil. Her pulse raced, each beat a desperate cry for escape. As the final incantation was uttered, May felt a profound sense of dread settle over her. It was as if the very air had changed, thickened with the weight of the ritual. She was now bound to Liang, a spirit she had never met in life, but would now be forever tied to in death. The realization was almost too much to bear. She swayed on her feet, her vision swimming with tears that she dared not shed. The ceremony concluded with a final, echoing chant. The shaman's voice fell silent, leaving a heavy, oppressive quiet in its wake. May stood there, a bride in a wedding that defied all natural order, her mind a cacophony of fear, sorrow, and a faint, desperate hope that somehow this nightmare would end. But deep down, she knew. This was just the beginning. After the ceremony, May was led to the bridal chamber, a room deep within the Liang family mansion, a place seldom visited by the living. The room felt more like a crypt than a bedroom, its air thick with the musty scent of age and decay. The flickering light from the candles cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance on the walls, mocking her plight. The chamber was adorned with ancestral portraits, their eyes following her every move, a silent chorus of judgment. An ancient wooden bed stood against one wall, draped in rich red silk that seemed out of place in the gloomy surroundings. The heavy curtains on the windows were drawn tight, sealing out the world and any hint of moonlight. The room was oppressive, the silence almost deafening. May's parents, along with Liang's parents, stood at the doorway, their faces etched with a mix of sorrow and resignation. They offered no words of comfort, no solace for the path they had set her on. The shaman, now a shadowy figure in the corner, muttered final incantations, his voice a low rhythmic drone that sent shivers down May's spine. As the adults exited, the door closed behind them with a final resounding thud, leaving May alone in the darkness. She stood for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts, trying to find some semblance of courage within her trembling frame. She approached the bed, her legs heavy, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her chest. With a deep breath, she lay down, the cool silk sheets brushing against her skin. She pulled the covers up, hoping to find some warmth, some comfort. But there was none. The room seemed to grow colder, the air denser, as if the very atmosphere was suffused with the presence of the dead. May's thoughts were a chaotic whirlpool of fear and confusion. She thought of the shaman's words, the chants that had filled the air, the symbolic gestures meant to bind her to a spirit. Her body tensed as she tried to suppress her rising panic. The candlelight flickered once more, casting strange shadows that seemed to creep closer to the bed. Then she felt it, a cold touch on her cheek. Her eyes snapped open, her breath catching in her throat. There, at the edge of the bed, stood Liang. His figure was faint, translucent.
Yet his presence was undeniable. His eyes, dark and deep, bore into hers with an intensity that froze her blood. "Do not fear," he whispered, his voice a hollow echo that seemed to reverberate through the room. "You are my wife now." May wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. She could only stare at the ghostly figure before her, her mind grappling with the impossible reality. Liang's form shimmered slightly, as if caught between worlds, his expression a mix of sorrow and determination. Liang's voice pulled her back to the present. "You are my wife," he repeated, his tone more insistent. "Together we will bring peace." May's fear gave way to a strange, numb acceptance. She had no choice, no way to escape this spectral union. Liang reached out a hand, his fingers brushing her cheek again, colder than the winter's chill. His touch was strangely tender, a ghostly semblance of affection. "You will not be alone," Liang murmured. "I will protect you." The promise, though hollow, was the only comfort May had. She nodded, her body still trembling, her mind still reeling. She lay back down, her eyes never leaving Liang's ghostly form. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she felt his presence beside her, a cold, spectral guardian. The night was long, filled with strange dreams and the constant unsettling awareness of the ghostly figure at her side. May knew her life would never be the same, bound as she was to the spirit of a man she had never known in life, but was now tethered to in death. As the first light of dawn crept into the room, the spectral presence of Liang began to fade, but May knew that her life had irrevocably changed. Each night thereafter she felt his presence, a constant chilling reminder of her unholy union. The village, steeped in its ancient traditions, continued to whisper about the ghost bride who lived among them, a living link to the otherworldly. May's tale became a cautionary legend, passed down through generations, a stark reminder of the lengths to which desperation could drive a family and the eerie customs that once held sway over their lives. My grandmother would often end the story with a warning, her voice hushed and eyes distant, reminding us of the delicate balance between the worlds of the living and the dead, and the unseen consequences that could arise from disturbing that balance. This story, haunting and poignant, serves as a chilling testament to the power of tradition and the enduring shadow of the past. It is a tale that has lingered in my family's memory, a spectral thread woven into the fabric of our history, a ghostly whisper from the depths of time.